In today's rapidly evolving workforce, one term seems to dominate discussions about unemployment and labor shortages: the skills gap. Whether it's politicians, business leaders, or economic analysts, this phrase is used to explain a myriad of employment issues. But what exactly is the skills gap? And is it really the crux of the problem? Or is it merely a convenient excuse for more systemic challenges? The skills gap, sometimes referred to as a skill shortage or structural unemployment, suggests that the reason people are struggling to find jobs is not due to a lack of available positions, but rather a mismatch between the skills workers possess and those employers require. For example, if a hospital needs to hire a doctor, but the only available applicant has a degree in computer science, that position will remain vacant, no matter how much effort the candidate put into their education. The argument here is simple. If the labor market were functioning properly, employers would be able to fill all their vacancies, and workers would find jobs. But when companies claim they're desperate for skilled workers, while so many individuals struggle to find employment, it's often the skills gap that's blamed. The skills gap narrative, however, often shifts responsibility from businesses onto workers. It subtly suggests that unemployment or underemployment is the worker's fault for not having the right qualifications or experience. This argument persists even during economic downturns, when jobs are harder to come by. However, when the economy is strong, the so-called skills gap seems to magically disappear. Research from Harvard, Northeastern University, and the Federal Reserve suggests that employers' demands for skills and experience tend to rise in times of high unemployment. In other words, when more people are looking for jobs, companies start asking for more qualifications. Yet, when the job market tightens and unemployment falls, employers suddenly become less picky and are willing to hire workers with fewer qualifications. This fluctuating skills requirement points to a deeper issue. The myth of the skills gap can be used by companies to justify unfair hiring practices and lower wages. When a company posts a job with overly high skill requirements and fails to find a suitable candidate, they can use that gap in skills as leverage during salary negotiations, offering lower pay than originally advertised. This allows businesses to get away with offering reduced compensation, all under the guise of a skills gap that isn't as pressing as it seems. For instance, a report by MIT revealed that many job advertisements, especially in the IT sector, often demand programming skills that aren't necessary for the actual role. IT help desk technicians, for example, are frequently required to know coding, even though most of their daily tasks don't involve programming. Yet, because companies equate computer with coding, they inflate their requirements unnecessarily. This leads to a workforce that's overqualified but underpaid. The skills gap as a political tool. Beyond its impact on individual job seekers, the myth of the skills gap has been weaponized to influence broader political and economic policies, especially around immigration, education, and workplace protections. Immigration policy. One of the most controversial uses of the skills gap is in lobbying for increased immigration of skilled workers. Companies argue that because there aren't enough qualified Americans to fill high-skill roles, they need to bring in workers from overseas. While this might help businesses fill positions, it can also keep wages lower and limit job opportunities for domestic workers. Education and training. Companies have successfully pushed for the creation of expensive retraining programs, claiming they're essential to fill the gap. Yet many of these programs are funded by taxpayers or the workers themselves, rather than the employers who would benefit. The corporate training industry is valued at over $360 billion and is projected to reach $800 billion by 2035, largely built on the premise that workers need to constantly update their skills to stay employable. Workplace protections. The skills gap myth also makes it easier for companies to avoid providing extensive on-the-job training or to resist offering workplace protections like fair wages or benefits. If a company claims it can't find a suitable candidate due to a skills shortage, it can pressure employees to accept less favorable terms, all while justifying its inability to pay higher wages or offer better working conditions. The reality behind low-paying jobs. While the skills gap is used to justify many corporate and political moves, the reality is that many of the jobs with supposed skill shortages simply don't pay well enough to attract workers. Jobs in nursing, teaching, the trades, and social services, for instance, are notoriously hard to fill. Not because people lack the necessary skills, but because these roles often offer low pay, high stress, and poor working conditions. In major cities, the pay for entry-level positions in these fields is often not enough to support a comfortable lifestyle. Even in trades, where skilled workers can eventually earn a decent salary, apprentices typically make little money for years. Meanwhile, teachers and nurses are required to invest in expensive degrees and complete on-the-job training before they can start earning. And even then, their salaries often don't reflect the demands of the job. Why people aren't retraining for better jobs? If the skills gap were truly the main issue, the market would respond accordingly. People would retrain, gaining the necessary skills for higher-paying, more secure jobs. However, this isn't happening for several reasons. Cost of retraining. Many jobs that are supposedly in high demand, like nursing or teaching, require significant educational investments. For someone already struggling financially, taking on student loans or spending years retraining may not be a feasible option. Low incentive. Many of the jobs with skill shortages don't offer enough of an incentive to make the retraining worthwhile. Why would someone spend years and thousands of dollars to become a nurse or a teacher when these roles are underpaid and undervalued compared to other less demanding jobs? Mismatch between demand and compensation. High-paying, respected careers with good work-life balance, like tech jobs, have historically attracted workers because there was a clear reward for gaining those skills. But as the tech industry cools and layoffs rise, even those once coveted jobs are becoming less attractive. The hidden profit behind the skills gap. At its core, the myth of the skills gap is profitable for many powerful players. Politicians can score easy points by touting retraining programs. Businesses can shift the burden of training onto workers or the government. And an entire industry has sprung up around corporate training and education. Corporations like Siemens, for example, have pushed the idea of apprenticeships as a solution to the skills gap, not because they want to benefit workers, but because it creates a new pool of skilled labor for them to choose from without having to invest in long-term employee development. Immigration and the skills gap. One of the most controversial uses of the skills gap narrative is in justifying immigration policies, particularly around skilled migration. In the United States, for instance, H-1B and EB-3 visas allow companies to bring in foreign workers to fill roles that supposedly can't be filled by Americans. However, when companies inflate their job requirements, creating an artificial skills gap, they can hire workers from overseas at lower wages who are dependent on their employer for visa sponsorship, challenging the myth. The skills gap isn't the only explanation for labor shortages, and by focusing solely on this issue, we overlook more significant structural problems in the labor market. Wages, working conditions, and job incentives play a far greater role in shaping employment trends than just the qualifications workers have. Conclusion: the true gap. Ultimately, the income gap is often just a symptom of a much deeper issue. The gap between what companies are willing to offer and what workers are willing to accept. The skills gap narrative may serve certain interests, but it doesn't reflect the full picture of why people are struggling to find good jobs, or why businesses are struggling to find qualified workers. It's time to look beyond the myth and focus on creating a labor market that offers fair wages, good working conditions, and real opportunities for growth. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more informative videos.